going to make homemade meatballs for spaghetti and meatballs. We're gonna bake up our sourdough, then we are going to make a salad and prep for a new loaf of sourdough. So I just pulled this sourdough out of the fridge. It's been bulk proofing in the fridge overnight. This will allow it to have a nice spring. So I'm gonna dump it out of my Banneton basket. Beautiful. And then I am going to score this baby. I'm gonna give it a nice score right through there. And then we'll just do a little wheat design. I finally got parchment paper, so it won't be a disaster putting it in the hot Dutch oven. I had my Dutch oven sitting in the oven at 500 degrees for the last hour, so it's nice and warm, but it is very hot, so always remember to use an oven mitt. And now we're gonna drop in our loaf of sourdough. Just be careful, you don't wanna burn yourself. And then I'll just peel a little bit of this away. And then we're gonna put the lid on and we're gonna pop that baby in the oven and let it bake for about 25 minutes at 500 with the lid on. Then we're gonna take the lid off and bake it for another like 15 or so minutes at 450. The reason we bake it with the lid on is it helps keep the moisture in the bread as it bakes. So it's very similar to doing a steam bake. So just in there at 500, I'm gonna set a timer so I don't forget about it. There we go. And now we are gonna go on to making the meatballs. I have my oven over here set to 350 degrees for that. Okay, we're gonna start by, we have about 2 pounds of meat, so I'm gonna start by taking 2 slices of bread. And we're gonna make kind of the starchy base that we mix into the meatballs, and then we'll add the meat to it. So 2 slices, I use 1 slice of bread per pound. And then we are going to cover the bread in milk. And this is, I don't use breadcrumbs in my recipe because I think breadcrumbs make meatballs kind of dry. So I use bread, and then I soak the bread in milk. Go. And I just kind of keep pouring it over until it's like really nice and soaked. So it's like gonna sponge it up. That will help it form a nice paste, which we're gonna be using to hold our meatballs together. Then I'm gonna add in 2 eggs. It's like the bread, 1 egg per pound of meat. So I'm gonna add in 2 eggs. 1 and 2. And then we're going to add in some garlic salt and some Italian melody. This is just Italian seasoning, so if you have just straight up Italian seasoning, that works. I just like Mrs. Dash's. You're gonna use a good amount. It will probably be about 2 tablespoons of the Italian seasoning because it's gonna be seasoning up the meat. And then we're gonna add in a good serving of garlic salt as well because that's going to be seasoning up the meat. So it's going to be kind of like maybe a tablespoon or just shy. And this is the fun part. Now you're going to just take your fingers in and you are going to mush everything together and kind of squeeze the soggy bread through your fingers with the egg mixture. You really can't do this with a spoon. You just kind of have to get all in there, but you're making meatballs, so your hands are already going to get all in there.
You got a question? What are you making?
We are making homemade meatballs for spaghetti and meatballs. We just threw in a sourdough loaf in the oven, and then we'll make a salad and prep a new loaf to have to bake up in 2 days. So we got a lot going on here tonight, and then of course we'll also make this spaghetti sauce. My middle child, Evie, she has been asking for spaghetti and meatballs. It's her favorite meal, so we are happy to oblige her. Plus, on Sunday, I made chili, like probably most of America, and I had leftover ground beef, ground pork, and so I just have a package of Italian sausage to whip up in. So it's just a good way to use some of it. So as you can see, I've mushed my bread, egg, and milk mixture together with the seasonings. It's now kind of like a goopy paste. And now we're going to mix in the meat. So we have 1 pound of mild Italian sausage. You could use spicy if you want. Again, we're kind of spice wimps here, so we just use mild. So 1 pound of mild Italian sausage. And then today I'm using 1/2 pound of ground beef and 1/2 pound of pork. Most of the time I use just like 1 pound of ground beef, but since I had extra of this from our chili, I don't want it to go to waste. And pork actually makes a really good meatball. When I make my homemade Swedish meatballs, I use only pork in them because it's very similar to the traditional way, which is using veal. So I've got 1/2 pound of pork, 1/2 pound of ground beef, and 1 pound of Italian sausage. And we are just going to combine this together until it is all mixed up. And the trick is if you take your meat out of the fridge, like at least 30 minutes before you're ready to do this, you won't have, I think there was an eggshell, there it is. You won't have very cold meat, which is much nicer to mash together. Cold meat, it can be very cold on the fingers. So always try to have it sit out for like 30 minutes to get kind of warmed up so you're not using freezing cold meat. And that will just save your fingers. I like to do the both where I squeeze it, and then I also do the push down method, so it's kind of a mixture of kneading and squeezing. You want to make sure you get all of the meat mixed together so that you're not having like clumps of ground beef or pork or sausage alone, but that they all get mixed up really well together. And the more you mix, the thicker it's going to come together as the starch in the bread kind of starts holding everything together to make a nice juicy meatball. Again, that's why I like to use bread soaked in milk instead of breadcrumbs, because I find breadcrumbs dry out your meatballs, and nobody wants a dry meatball. There we go. Also, if you use kind of ground beef that has a bit more fat in it, so like an 80-20 versus a lean ground beef, you'll have a more tender meatball. The leaner the meat, the less juicy and moist your meatball will be. Okay, so now you can see it is all mixed together into a nice goopy paste, which is what we want. And we're just gonna pop up a little ball and do a roll. So it's sticky, but not sticky, not too sticky. So if yours is too sticky or runny, that means you've added too much milk. And the only way to really fix that would be to add a little bit more bread to soak it like that and to kind of help bring it up, or you could throw in a little bit of breadcrumbs. So always try not to add too much milk to your bread. There we go. But I find that what I like to do is 1 egg per pound of meat and 1 slice of bread per pound, and you just cover that bread and soak it up until it can't soak up anymore. So don't over pour, just slowly pour it and let it absorb. There we go. And I have made these without the Italian sausage, using just straight up ground beef. They're good. They're not but the Italian sausage really, I think, makes them over the edge.
You got a question? What are you making?
We are making homemade meatballs for spaghetti and meatballs. We popped a sourdough loaf in the oven that we've been working on for the last 2 days. And then we are going to make the sauce, a salad, and then we will make a new loaf of bread.
And you have a question? What type of bread? I believe they mean for the meatballs.
For the meatballs, this right over here, I have some honey wheat bread that I used. It's just a sandwich bread. You don't want anything too crusty because you want it to absorb it. So just kind of a light, like if you had white bread or a light wheat bread, but nothing too dense or thick because you want it to, or chewy, because you want the whole thing to kind of turn to mush. I guess if you also had maybe stale bread, that was like leftover, you could cut it and then just soak it in the milk a little bit longer so it absorbed the liquid. The problem is if you use like sourdough bread in this, or an Italian bread with a crusty like crust on it, like a chewy crust, that might not absorb the milk, and then you could get big chunks of like bread of the crust in your meatball, which wouldn't be very good. There we go. And then I always try to make my meatballs about the same size, you know, give or take a couple grams. That way they all cook up evenly. And I'll be popping them. I have my oven preheated to 350 degrees, and we'll be baking them in. They only need about 30 minutes or so to bake. They don't take too long. If you make bigger meatballs, like bigger sized ones, then they would take a little bit longer to bake. Sometimes I make like these huge meatballs, which are like 4 meatballs in one, because my stepfather, one of his favorite restaurants in Minneapolis growing up was called Dinopoli's, and they were known for their huge meatballs. So you get like your plate of spaghetti with just one big meatball on it.
You got a request to go over the recipe again? 'Cause
yes.
Someone just joined.
Okay, so we are making these meatballs. We started out by putting 2 slices of bread in the bowl, and we covered them with a little bit of milk just to soak it all up. That way they will get nice and soggy. Then we added in 2 eggs, essentially 1 slice of bread per pound, 1 egg per pound. So we're doing 2 pounds of meat. And then we mix the egg and the bread and the like the milk mixture. We mix that together, and we add in about 2 tablespoons of Italian sausage, or not Italian seasoning, sorry, and then 1 tablespoon of garlic salt. We mixed it all to a paste. Then I added in a pound of Italian sausage, a ½ pound of ground pork, and a ½ pound of ground beef. You can also use just a pound of ground beef instead of half and half. We mixed them all up together. I'm gonna wash my hands since they're rather sticky, and then we'll pop those in the oven. Okay, so I have these going in my oven right here. I have it preheated to 350 degrees.
And if any of you have questions about the recipes, every time after each live, we will post the full video, so you can always rewatch later through our page.
Okay, now we're gonna prep the sauce and start the noodles in, because I believe we have our water boiling here. So I like to use a good quality spaghetti noodle. I find that they're only like $2 or $1 more expensive per pack, but they have a much better, I think, texture. So these are Rao's spaghetti noodles. I really like them over this, like the traditional spaghetti noodle that you would get, like the store brand or the Barilla. They're a little bit thicker than things, and they have a whiter color. That means that they're like fresh, kind of rolled. I know I'm probably breaking in half, and that's probably making some Italians mad out there, but I got kids and I already got to cut up their spaghetti. Let's see, let me find my pasta spoon. I put them in, I have them in my nice boiling water, and I'm going to give it a good stir just so that they don't.
There's someone else who made spaghetti and used those noodles tonight.
Yeah, I will say they're just the best. I know they're like $1 or so more expensive per pack, but I think it's well worth it. They are just a little bit better. Okay, let's prep up our sauce. So I'm going to put a little bit of olive oil.
It's pronounced Rao's, they say.
Oh, really? I had no idea. I was just thinking, yeah, Rao's doesn't sound like a very Italian name at all. That makes way more sense. Okay, so Rao's. Yeah, you know what? It has to have that extra vowel in it because it's Italian. Okay. So I'm gonna chop up an onion, and I'm gonna do kind of a smaller chop.
It was or still is a restaurant in New York City.
Oh.
So I guess they just,
That's cool. I'm sitting here thinking they were some really cool, authentic thing for me. They're more expensive.
And there's a lot of Italians in New York.
They are, yes. So it's probably one of their Nona's famous recipes. I'm gonna do a kind of a smaller dice on my onions, just so we don't have any big pieces in here. And we're gonna caramelize them up. Go over. And we're making enough to feed our family of 7. I have 5 kiddos, so this is probably a lot bigger than most people's spaghetti pots. And we're gonna chop that up. Okay, we're gonna add this to our, let me turn my skillet on, to our olive oil. And we're gonna let them caramelize up to kind of bring out their sweet flavor, which will pair nicely. And then I'm gonna add in some minced garlic. You could use fresh garlic if you want. I personally think fresh garlic is just a pain to mince up. It does give you a better like bite or kick, but minced garlic works well, and it's worth it. I hate doing it, peeling off that skin and smushing it and chopping it. It's not my cup of tea. Okay, let's give this a good stir. Perfect. There we go. And then I'm gonna I like to stir my pasta every now and then, because since it's, you know, kind of starchy, it can stick to the bottom of your pot if you don't stir it. So I like to stir it. And then while we're waiting for this to saute up, I'm gonna slice up some mushrooms to have in it. Sometimes I also add in like peppers or zucchini, but we have mushrooms today. We're gonna give them a good slice up. I'll give them a quick wash because these are kind of dirty. Sometimes you get some clean ones. See, a lot of times I buy the ones that are already pre-washed, but I get these a quick chop up. I'm just gonna do a kind of a thin slice on them. That way they'll, you know, brown up nicely in our saute pan. You'll wanna make sure you saute them up before you add the sauce. That way they'll just have a better tenderness to them, and it will bring out more of that mushroom flavor. And I find with mushrooms, a little bit of mushrooms actually goes a long way when you cut them up. Baby bellas also work well. These are just white button. I typically kind of pick whatever mushrooms on sale. They're similar enough in profiles for this dish that it doesn't matter.
You asking for a quick recap of what you're cooking tonight?
Yes, we are making, we made homemade meatballs. We just popped those in the oven. And then now we're making our spaghetti sauce, noodles. We popped the sourdough in the oven. That should be beeping soon, and we'll have to take the lid off and check on its progress. Then we'll make a salad, and we're gonna start on a new loaf of sourdough. I like to kind of keep it going every 2 days. That way I always have a loaf around. Stir this up. We're gonna let these caramelize until they're nice and ready. Beautiful. Perfect. And got my spices over here. We've got our noodles cooking. So why don't we work on our loaf of bread while we're waiting? That way we can get one fold in, because I want to show you guys the fold in the sourdough, because that's the most important part is to do it. But let me get, we've got a little bit of the starch boiling over here, which is fine. They say if you put a wooden stick over your pot, it's supposed to prevent it from boiling over. I think it's just an old wives' tale. Okay, let me get my ingredients. Got my bowl, my scale, my Danish whisk, and I've got unbleached bread flour. And I'm going to turn my water on to get to warm. And my starter. For making the bread, I always use a scale to measure it out. If I'm feeding it, I don't have to be as precise. So we are going to start by adding in 100 grams of sourdough starter. We made sourdough coffee cake, sourdough discard coffee cake this morning, or this at lunch. So I fed it then, And you can see we've got a nice bubble on our sourdough, which means it's nice and active, which you need for making sourdough. So I'm gonna add in 100 grams of sourdough starter that's been fed within the last 6 to 8 hours. Feeding it keeps it nice and active, which you need for the fermentation process. There we go. So I've got 100 grams of that. And you want to add in then, let's turn on, 375 grams of warm water. Warm water is the key. It will help the flour absorb it. So I've got my water warming up over here. Okay, good. That's warm. Get a measuring cup. 375 grams is close to about 1.5 cups. Okay, so 375 grams. Before I pour it in, let me stir this. You gotta always keep my eyes on everything as we're cooking. I want them to caramelize up nicely. Beautiful. Perfect. Let's turn it down a teeny. Okay. 375 grams of water, which is about 1.5 cups. But you really want to measure it using grams. It's just so much more accurate than using the cup, measuring cups. Just because you can have things packed down more with the flour. Ooh, 371. So close. There we go. And then I'm going to give it a quick little stir with my dough whisk. That way it is all like we're spreading out the starter and enzymes into all the water. And I hear our bread beeping, which means we are ready to pull off that lid. So we'll come back to that in 1 second. But these are getting a nice caramelization on it. Perfect. Okay, let's pull off that lid. Here. And this is always when you know if it's risen up and it's poof. So look how much it's spread out, that score. That's kind of your little big elephant poof that you've come out. So now is the second part. I'm gonna put that on here because it's very hot. I'm gonna turn the temperature down to 450 degrees. And we're gonna bake it for about another 20 minutes or until you have the coloring that you want. So I'm gonna set my timer for 20 minutes, give or take, and let's finish up dinner. We can give a quick peek of the meatballs while they're cooking for those who weren't in there. They're cooking up nicely on my top shelf there. Beautiful. Okay, let's finish off our flour. Let's get a bowl for this. So with the flour, let's give it a stir. We need 500 grams of bread flour, unbleached bread flour. And that's about 3 or so cups, give or take some. So I'll start out with some full ones. That's 177 grams there. Now we're at 340. And we want to get to 500. Good. And then I'm going to just put in about a good, you're going to need about 2 teaspoons of salt in there, which is about, if you're using the scale, like 8 or 9 grams. And then what we're going to do is we are just going to mix the flour into our starter, our active starter. And we're going to using a dough whisk works so much better than using like a regular wooden spoon or whatnot. It just works so much better. It really helps incorporate it. Also, like a lot of people say, oh, sourdough is so sticky. It's hard to work with. All you have to do is put a little bit of flour on your hands, and that will help with the stickiness when you're kneading it. Here we go. You see how it's just incorporated so quickly. And then the trick is for the next 2 hours, about every 20 to 30 minutes, I'm going to fold and stretch the dough into itself. That's very key to making sure you've got the, get the bubbles out and it can ferment and rise. So we're gonna leave that there and we'll be ready to fold in there. Let me check on these noodles. I don't think they're done yet, but I always like to check. A good way you can always check is if you break them in half. I don't think you'll be able to see it, but there's a little bit of whiteness in the middle of the noodle. That tells me it's not cooked all the way. That's the uncooked pasta, that's why it's white. So I don't even need to taste it to know that it's undone just by breaking it in half. Okay, let's get on to this sauce. We have the nice caramelization of these onions, so we're gonna throw in our mushrooms. I'm gonna put a little bit more olive oil in here and use up the rest of this bottle. I'm gonna toss our mushrooms in and let them saute up as well. Give them a good stir. And we're gonna have them saute until they're nice and brown. I'm gonna grab just a bit more. My olive oil ran out, so I'm gonna go grab my other bottle to add some more. Just because I'm using a really big pan, you need a little bit more olive oil. I'm going to give it a good stir around, and then I'm just going to make sure they're all kind of coated and spread it out. And we'll turn up our heat now. Okay. Now, let's work on our salad while the rest of this is cooking. So we're just having a basic kind of Italian green salad. Kids can pick their salad dressing. So we're just using tomatoes.
You got a question? What are you cooking?
We are made some homemade meatballs that are baking in the oven. We're making a tomato sauce for them, or spaghetti sauce. And then we popped in a sourdough bread in the oven that's baking up. And we are working on the dough for our next sourdough. Now we're just gonna make a quick salad. I like to buy my salad or my lettuce leaves, like my romaine. I buy it in bulk from Costco in the big packs in these heads because they'll last in your fridge for a long time without going bad. Versus if you buy the salad bags, those go bad so fast. So this I can buy a big pack of them and it will last us 2-3 weeks without going bad at all. Okay. And it's funny. In my family, my girls, they love the really green leaves, while my boys like the crunchy leaves. So it's funny how they differ on their choices. Give this a nice stir. And then I'm going to stir our pasta. I think it's still going to need about a minute or so on there. And let's chop up our sweet peppers and our tomatoes. You'll know if your knife is dull if it cannot cut through a tomato skin. That will tell you if it slides on it instead of cutting through right away. That means your knife needs to be sharpened. That's that, and same with your cutting an onion. If it starts to slide any, it needs to be sharpened. And that's the #1 way of like cutting yourself in the kitchen is if your knife is dull and it slips while you're cooking. So sharper knives are actually safer because you're less likely to have an accident. We'll cut up our tomatoes. Beautiful. And pop these in our salad. And then we're going to cut up some sweet peppers. The one thing that's nice about sweet peppers is they have very little seeds in them and very little of the like kind of fibrous veining. And then kind of a simple small cut through and toss those. You could also add olives. I like olives, but nobody else in my family likes them. So, but olives also work great in this salad, and some red onions if you wanted to have a nice little kick. Those work well as a. There we go. Let's pop these in. Now we have our salad made. Our mushrooms are getting there. Let's check our noodles, see where they are standing. And those are just about done. I'm gonna get the colander out so I can drain them. I'm gonna use my bigger one. This is a cool one. If you don't have one of these, it slides out so it hooks onto your sink. It's nice for when you're doing a big pot of pasta, because you can pour it right over that. If I'm using smaller when I have a handheld colander, that's nice to pour into. We're starting to see how our mushrooms are starting to wilt and get a nice little browning crust on them, which is what we want. Perfect. Okay. Now I'm going to drain out my pasta. If you were making like a white wine base or a cream sauce, you would want to reserve a bit of your pasta things, but since we're making a spaghetti sauce, we don't need to reserve it because we don't need it to thicken up our sauce at all. Pour this guy out. I'm just gonna have those resting because I always throw my noodles into my pasta sauce when we're doing it, so they all get covered. And I also find that if you have leftovers, they store much better in a sauce than they do outside of a sauce. So I'll toss those in with my pasta sauce when we're done. Okay. I'm gonna peek on our meatballs, see how they're progressing. Oh, those are almost done. Great, which is good because we are about to add in our sauce. So my favorite sauces to use are, I use half and half. I use half of the Rayos, and half of their vodka. So half marinara, half vodka. Vodka sauce has a little bit of cream and Parmesan cheese added into it, and I just really like the flavors of it. But before we add those in, I'm gonna put in just a bit more Mrs. Dash's Italian Medley blend, just about a teaspoon or so. I wait to add it until the end when I'm about to add my sauce in because sometimes it can stick and burn to your pan. So I add it towards the end and then when we're about to add the things. And then a little bit of garlic salt, and this will just season up these real quick. Give them a nice flavor and a little extra boost to our sauce. There we go. Now I'm going to add those in straight in. Give it a stir. And then I'm going to turn this down to low because now we're really just simmering. Beautiful. Okay. I have to use my trick. If I have a jar and I can't open it because I swear the older I get, apparently my grip strength is gone. I just use a butter knife, I flip it upside down, and I just poke it in and try to add in a little air gap. And that will let some air out, which will cause it to allow it to open easier. Let's see. Right, there we go. I think I heard it pop, but let me try one more time. Perfect. And then it just lets out some of the air that's a vacuum seal on it, and then it loosens up your lid. I recommend, if you're making spaghetti sauce, go for the slightly more expensive spaghetti sauce. It does make a difference. My favorite is this Rao's. I think like there's Little Italian or Rayos. There's Little Italy, that one's also pretty good. And there's another like Bischetti or something like that. It's like a more fancy one. The more expensive marinara sauces do have better flavor profiles, and they're much richer, like they have more of a tomato base than the other ones, and they're not as sweet. These are my favorite brand so far that I've tried. They are a lot more expensive, I will say, but I think it's a cost where it's well worth it. Okay, these meatballs are ready, so let me grab my oven mitts and I'm going to pull them out. You want to make sure when you're making meatballs that you don't overcook them because that dries them out. So these, and you can tell they're done. They've got a nice firmness to them, but they look beautiful. And I add them straight to the sauce so they don't dry out either. Nobody wants a dry meatball. And these we made with a pound of Italian sausage, a half a pound of ground pork, a half a pound of ground beef, 2 eggs, 2 slices of bread, 2 tablespoons of Italian seasoning, and a tablespoon of garlic salt, and a little bit of milk to soak up in the bread. And that helps keep them into a nice, moist meatball. Put that in there. Now we're just gonna stir. We're gonna cover this all up until they're nice and moist. And then we're gonna toss in our noodles. And that just makes the way you get all your noodles covered in the spaghetti sauce. Give them a good shake. And I'm gonna stir those in. I'm gonna get some tongs because it's much easier to stir them in with some tongs. Here we go. And we're just gonna twist and move it here. I'm gonna turn off my heat because we don't need it to cook anymore. And this, I will say, if you have leftover spaghetti, always mix it with your sauce. Don't keep it separate from your noodles because your noodles will first of all soak up the nice flavor of the sauce, but it just melds together so much better. And this way you're gonna have that nice saucy bite on every noodle. There we go. Beautiful. Woo! Splash. Okay. Let's go check on our bread, see how much we have time with that. We've got those cooking. Okay, let's check this, see what it looks like. You can take it, you want to basically take it out when you like the color of it. So depending on what you're using it for, we've got some nice color in there. Let's see. I think it's actually pretty good to come out. So I'm gonna go grab my oven mitts right over there and we'll take it out. There we go. Look at that, beautiful. Some people like to cook theirs for a really brown crust. That I think dries out your sourdough. I prefer having a lighter crust because I love using it to make grilled cheese sandwiches and whatnot that over the next couple of days, so I don't want it to be super, super brown. I'm gonna put it on my trivet. There we go. I'm always afraid. I saw somebody once put something really hot on their stove and it shattered it. And so in my mind, I'm like, oh, don't put it on there, even though you cook things on it. I know it's not. Okay, before we plate up, let's do a fold and stretch of our bread and then we're gonna plate our thing. So here is our sourdough, it's sitting, and we're gonna do the first of 4 stretches. Now, sourdough is sticky at this stage. So what I recommend is just sprinkling a little bit of flour over the top. You don't need too much, and then really coating your hands in the flour. This is going to prevent it from sticking to you. There we go, and we're gonna do the fold and the stretch. And you're gonna just pull and stretch. And this is essentially, we're making this same bread, but it's gonna be ready in 2 days because sourdough is a very long process. Easy, but long. Okay, so we've gotten our fold and stretch. We're gonna let it sit for another 30 minutes and we're gonna do another fold and stretch. And we're gonna do that 3 more times and then we're gonna let it sit out for about 4 or 6 hours and then we'll pop it in the fridge for the bulk rise. Let me wash my hands and then we are going to plate up dinner. Okay, so what my family will be having tonight, we'll have our sourdough bread, but I'm gonna let it sit for a minute because you don't wanna cut sourdough right away because the moisture escapes out of it. Okay, so we're gonna have our nice, beautiful spaghetti. And then you have 2 meatballs. And let me get some tongs for the salad. And then we'll add our salad on. And then we'll have a slice of our sourdough bread. And that is dinner. Well, thank you guys for joining. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I do live cooking shows every single day, and we enjoy having you. Feel free to send us messages if you want us to cook something. I've already had a request for some chicken and dumplings, so I'll be making that soon. But again, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe.